The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 62. Parentheses. Symbols. There was nothing like the scam of free will to numb the mind, and yet obedience was a strange soil. It grew comfort fast, resisted the weather of personal aspiration, and watered itself with the occasional lies of voluntary decisions. To keep servants passive and obedient, one would have to strictly limit the spectrum of choices, yet at the same time allow very lively debate on the matter. Every once in a while, Dumbledore listened to Severus's objections, let him voice his fears, his disagreements, his deeply rooted unwillingness to cooperate, and go along with his horrifying plan. It was a clever game, permitting Severus to let it all out, then offering him a word of kindness or two. Then the storm would subside, and Severus would somehow be there still, expected to pull himself together, expected to have recharged after his tantrum, expected to obey. It
is our choices that show us what we truly are,
Dumbledore loved to say, but when it came to Severus, the saying changed almost immediately to,
"You have no choice, Severus. You must do it. You must be the one to do it."
Severus sealed the bottle of the healing potion he had brewed for Dumbledore, knowing far too well that the old man would not consume it. This was a new game, Dumbledore's newest one, pretending that he appreciated Severus's medical assistance when in fact he put none of the potion Severus prepared and made no effort at all to improve his succumbing health. Severus knew he wasn't taking the potions. What was impressive, however, was that he still requested them on a daily basis. Mockery at its finest. Severus placed the bottle on his desk and left to wash his hands. He wondered if perhaps it was no coincidence that he'd figured out what they were dealing with, Horcruxes. Perhaps it wasn't really a secret. It appeared as though he had been given only the smallest bits of information, and only so he can play his part right. But sometimes he felt that the breadcrumbs he'd followed to the discovery of the Horcrux secret had been left out on purpose too. It took him a moment to thoroughly clear his mind, and when he did, he cursed himself for even bothering. Having somehow finished his endless work, he made it to his chambers, not knowing which path he took. The cold spread across his skin as he undressed, and he mentally applauded himself for not having lost his nerve since the term started, especially with a boy constantly slumping on his desk during classes. Hopefully, a few more detentions with Filch would teach him that he wasn't going to continue like this. Resting back against the pillows that felt oddly uncomfortable, he shot a hard glare at his forearm and shut his eyes. The taunting in his mind never stopped, and his breath was caught at the new sharp pain on his mark. The dubiously protective instinct he had senselessly developed towards Harry was now slowly turning into a hungry beast that yearned for all the negative interaction they had established since they first met. The boy would loathe him again. Severus looked forward to it. In the dim light of the room, all coming from a single dying torch, he felt completely ridiculous for denying himself sleep so he could think of this. He should have gone to Dumbledore. After the very first time he noticed the boy developing this strange attachment to him, he should have gone to Dumbledore and stopped it. But he hadn't noticed until it was too late, until it was mutual. It was not mutual. Neither Dumbledore nor the Dark Lord would have been able to save him from this. Why was he even thinking of it now? To become present meant accepting the risk of absence. The absence of Harry now should be pleasant. "It is," he thought stubbornly. He shook his head as though trying to shoo away an irritating fly. Unimportant things were occupying his mind too much lately. He'd helped Harry because he'd been asked to. He'd held back his rage and pretended to be kind to the boy because sentimental breakdowns disgusted him, and he was entirely unwilling to witness one. He couldn't decide whether the last part was true or not. He didn't know what force compelled him to care about the fact that the boy would most assuredly witness him murder the last father figure he had left in the world, but he did. He stopped as he mentally watched the boy's features falling in shock, just as Severus would lower his wand. Not that Harry's feelings mattered, they never did. Another dead Potter, and another funeral Severus wouldn't be welcome to attend. He didn't dare approach Lily's grave either, not for a long time. It was the fear of facing the truth that kept him away, and the childish resentfulness at the fact that James Potter was somehow still with her, buried next to her, still closer to her than Severus had ever been. His mind shifted to the memory of the other grieving ceremony that had taken place that same week. To that Severus had attended. He'd wept along with the other Death Eaters, trying to understand what had happened, damning and cursing and screaming and arguing. All of them kept their heads down in deep sorrow for the Dark Lord's loss and in regret for failing to protect him. Severus let them believe he felt the same, and no one knew he had been crying for Lily instead. He was angry with her, angry for trying to protect James Potter's little bastard and recklessly sacrificing her life like that. She should have stepped aside. She should have lived. Severus would do the same for Harry now. He suspected that Harry had yet to realize how important he was to the world. Symbols never died. It was the trace people left behind after they were gone. Harry's memory would become a symbol, whether they won the war or not. What am I going to do with the symbol? He bitterly thought. He looked at the dark mark again. He snorted before tugging to pull down his sleeve. Carry it on him, he supposed. Severus leaned against his desk, folded his arms, and stared at Potter. Loath as he was to admit it, he didn't know what to do with the boy anymore. The class was dismissed 5 minutes ago. Nevertheless, Harry didn't seem willing to leave. He silently sat where he was, staring at the book lying open before him, his backpack on the chair his friend was previously occupying. Expected as it'd be of Severus to remind Harry that the lesson was over, and he should be leaving, it occurred to him that repeating the same vicious circle of pointless conversations would only waste his time and have him damn himself for even trying to take the boy seriously. He vaguely wondered how he managed such self-composure under the most immature of situations, and he stopped when he did not recognize the look in the green eyes.
Yes, I've got a question.
And finally the mask was cracking. Go on.
What you said about shielding a place with protective charms. I don't understand if it has to do with who owns the place or who lives in it.
You may ask this again next time. Severus cut him short and averted his eyes from the boy to check the time. He mentally slapped himself for believing Harry was going to ask anything important or even relevant. Relevant to what? Harry looked up long enough to clearly see the warning glare Severus gave him. Too late, it occurred to him that one might take it as intriguing.
Sir.
The boy's voice was steady. It startled him. Harry took a deep breath, and for a moment Severus could see the fury in his eyes.
I'm only asking because you said you will examine us. The book doesn't explain it very well. Please.
Severus was torn between believing that the little brat was being honest and being cautious to avoid falling into yet another trap, and to think that he'd truly believed they had left this in the past. The damn boy never wavered. He felt himself going pale at the possibility of making peace with Harry and having to comfort him all over again for demons that were not going to go away. A part of himself insisted that being professional did not include avoiding problematic students. Another part threatened to insist on torturous suicide should he go near the boy again. A shiver ran through him as he approached the desk and pushed the backpack to the floor. He sat next to Harry and, despite himself, motioned at him to start. Harry slid his book to the middle of the desk and turned a few pages. Listening through the questions Harry had, Severus witnessed himself nodding stupidly again and again, briefly going through clarifications in between, borrowing Harry's quill to underline and circle and cross out. Harry never raised his voice as he talked.
Thank you, sir.
And
one more thing, sir.
Severus could tell by his expression that he had no intention of leading the subject elsewhere. He was most certainly pleased with that. And so he was missing the point. Harry wasn't aware of his exquisite future, but he was certainly aware of his pathetic present. Why was he choosing to waste his break by talking to Severus instead of gossiping with his friends was beyond him. But then again, wasn't this madness always beyond any sense? Severus restrained himself from making a nasty remark as Harry skipped to a section of the book they hadn't reached in class yet. A section they wouldn't touch at all, really. It was a chapter Dumbledore had deemed off-limits. Advanced magic shouldn't worry you yet. Harry's eyes found his. Severus turned his attention back to the book and nodded at Harry to pay attention. If you cast the Videlius while doubting its efficiency, it will be doomed to fail. Exactly like conjuring a Patronus, or casting an Unforgivable. You need to mean it.
But what if a secret keeper doesn't care to keep the secret anymore? Can he quit the deal, or does he have to spill the secret out to someone?
The deal, as you put it, can only break by death. This is exactly why this particular charm is rarely cast.
Because people can trust no one.
Yes, but people trust it anyway. and betrayed, and got betrayed, and then trusted again. A strange road it was. Because people trust foolishly and blindly.
So if I want to hide a secret, and I've no one to make my secret keeper, what do I do?
If you have no one to trust enough to keep your secret, and you have no one in your life to care to do so. Harry nodded. Then you don't need to hide it, no one cares. A rather large brick settled in Severus's stomach, and he resisted the urge to flee the scene. Harry nodded again, and Severus discovered that he weighed 1,000,000 pounds and was unable to stand up. His last words scurried across his mind as he was reminded that only recently they didn't have to starve the elephant in the room to exchange a couple of words. The distance they had established since the beginning of the school year seemed annoyingly meaningless now. As much as Severus chased away these familiar urges, his sitting here felt normal to him. To sacrifice his own 15-minute break between classes and postpone relieving his bladder for another hour just so he could stupidly watch Potter express his sudden desire for knowledge was surreal and, most importantly, old. He fixed his expression before giving Harry's book back to him. Is that all? Harry nodded.
Hogwarts is protected by very powerful ancient spells, Severus. That shouldn't worry you for now.
And what about after?
The defensive magic of the castle will only strengthen once it is seized. I do not worry about Hogwarts, not in that sense. It's only bricks and stones, after all.
Dumbledore made a pause.
It is the students I fear for. When the time comes, you must do everything in your power to protect them, to make sure they don't suffer.
Shouldn't we hide the Muggleborns? Dumbledore shook his head.
An unnecessary risk, too dangerous, and it would raise suspicions.
Severus cleared his throat and inspected the Hogwarts map lying on the table. He trailed a finger upon it. The boy owns a bewitched map. His father's undoubtedly. It could be used as a tracker. Dumbledore seemed to consider it. Severus's heart raced through the steps they'd have to take to prepare everything in time, and he shifted impatiently. He could feel Dumbledore's eyes examining his every movement.
We can't. It is crucial for Harry to keep it. The portraits will remain loyal to you. They will guide you and inform you of everything that happens at the castle.
The portraits! Severus exclaimed. They'd never trust me. You leave me options, no way to escape should my cover get blown. And I don't even have a say in any of this. Let me take his map. He pressed his finger against the Slytherin common room on the regular map and tapped it. I need to know what they're up to.
Do you need a bewitched map to know your own students' whereabouts, Severus?
Severus pressed his lips together stubbornly. To be trapped within a castle that would most likely compress until it choked him was not his ideal way of dying.
Some rooms in my chambers are permanently locked,
Dumbledore continued, unaffected by Severus's misery.
They are to remain that way. You will have to move in, nevertheless. The headmaster cannot possibly sleep at the dungeons.
Dumbledore smiled fondly, but Severus could see the remorse behind it. Is that all you have to say? A long moment of silence followed, threatening to devour Severus alive. He felt close to snapping. How do you expect me to do what I'm told when I barely know what the plan is? Am I supposed to read your mind? Study the stars for clues?
Severus,
perhaps you take too much for granted, Dumbledore. Perhaps I don't want to do this anymore. He only realized he had jumped up from his chair when he heard it clang against the floor. His insides had gone cold. This was exactly the conversation he had expected when he came here this evening. It was unbearable all the same.
Sit down.
Indeed. Severus picked up the chair and slumped back into it. The man was not going to tell him anything. Severus was fed up with the shite that was supposed to be loyalty when it was merely submission. What he wanted, what he feared, what he thought, it was all irrelevant. In the end, he'd simply have to comply and see that the world would not fall apart after Dumbledore's death. But it would. He was suddenly attacked by the memory of a body sleeping next to his, pressed against him, the steady breath warming the side of his neck and his arm going numb from the weight of it. He was startled by the absurdity of recalling such a memory here, now. He shook it away and dragged the map closer. What is this? The small angular scribble on the map under the Whomping Willow could only mean one thing. The passage was still there. It had never been sealed.
You know what it is, Severus.
Is it still accessible, then? He asked, fixing his jaw. You lied to me. Not that it surprised him, But to leave the tunnel open for anyone to use after all these years to endanger people's lives like this? You told me it was pulled down.
I did.
Dumbledore stroked his beard.
Ah, yes, I must have. But you were a student and a very curious one, too. I wouldn't want you putting yourself or anyone else in danger by trying to follow Remus again.
But he never meant to follow Lupin. It wasn't his idea to do so. Interesting how Dumbledore never paid any attention to the details that didn't conform to his worldview. He'd probably forgotten entirely that Potter and Black had very clearly and very casually attempted to murder him that night. Having a Dark Lord trying to murder you because of a prophecy, try having two classmates trying to murder you because you existed. They had everything, Potter and Black. Wealth, popularity, friends, skill, wit, good looks. They had everything. Severus only had Lily, and they hated him for it. They wouldn't rest until they made sure Severus had lost even that. They couldn't let him have anything. It made them sick to their stomachs to think that Severus would experience any happiness at all. And that night, they decided that they didn't even want him to be alive anymore. They hadn't even been punished. Severus recalled looking at them the day after in class. So normal and cheerful and okay, because pranks are for laughs, aren't they? No one takes a prank seriously. It was Severus's fault that he couldn't move past what they'd done. He should just let it go, Lily said. And after 20 years, the tunnel to the Shrieking Shack was still reachable for anyone to use to sneak out at night. No wonder no one cared when Severus complained countless times through the years that Harry did not follow the rules. Apparently, no one in the school was meant to! And Minerva.
She knows nothing,
Dumbledore said.
We'll keep it that way.
The rest of the order.
No one must know, Severus, especially Harry.
Severus nodded.
Surely Voldemort intends to post his own teachers after my departure. I expect you to do everything in your power to protect the current staff. If sacrifices have to be made, make them. The children must be your only priority.
Dumbledore passed him an envelope.
This is something Aberforth may need to see, should you have to prove to him your true loyalty. You are not to give him this unless things have gone terribly wrong.
Severus took the envelope and Dumbledore stopped him.
Don't open it, it's for him.
What about Grimmauld, please?
The Order will need it. Don't make them have to change their location.
I'll stay away.
Thank you, Severus.
A dark, bony hand covered his own and squeezed lightly. Despite everything, Severus appreciated it. He looked at their connected hands with a melancholy that was suddenly achingly heavy. For a moment he held his breath. He swallowed back a bile and rose from his chair, pulling his hand away. Dumbledore stood. Severus did too. It was Dumbledore the one who came closer. So close Severus thought they would hug, but it never happened.
Good night, Severus. Thank you.
It was a pleasure meeting you then. You've been my only friend. Good night. At the cold silence of the corridor, Severus leaned against the wall and carefully spelled the letter open. Inside there was nothing but a single piece of paper. I found it, my brother. Remember how you insisted that it didn't exist? I found it, and yet it didn't work, I thought. I hoped that it would bring her back. What a foolish old man I am. How silly of me. Your prediction that someday I was going to pay especially for this was right. She's not coming back. But thankfully, I shall meet her soon. A.D. Confused, Severus read it twice, and then a third time. It didn't make sense. Shaking his head in annoyance for yet another thing he was not aware of, he put it back in the envelope and closed it shut.